Okay, Andy, over to you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to invite us to begin with a wee bit of prayer. And I've got a short responsive prayer that I'd like to invite you to join in with me in the bold bits. You'll be on mute, probably, and that's fine. But when I say the bold bits, just kind of join in sotto voce, or even you can shout if you want. We come with faith, and we seek understanding. We come with doubts, and we seek understanding. We come with griefs, and we seek understanding of our own hearts and misdesirings. We seek understanding of your ways and will. We seek understanding for preempting the dangers of this present darkness. We seek understanding. You'll have realised from that's part of a longer liturgy, but I did feel it would fit well with what we're doing just now. So just give a bit of what I call a mise en scène about this. It's really a discussion, as I hope you picked up from the the invitation, really, for those who preach and who have found themselves shying away from mentioning the climate crisis or biodiversity crisis, or from mentioning living more simply or greenly. And if you're here and you haven't suffered in that kind of a way, then please give space to others who might need to share something about that and process that. In personal terms, I recently wrote notes for a sermon in church. I said about 2 months ago. I go around as part of, I preach in different churches. I help do cover for places where churches haven't got a minister at the moment. So in one, I was invited to preach and to lead communion, and it was one I hadn't been in before. It was the first time I'd been there, and I'd written a final section for my sermon and it was the passage about Jesus stilling the storm. If you follow the lectionary, you'll probably remember looking at it yourselves. And what I'd written segued from a meditation on Jesus' presence in the storm to making a link to the increasing literal storminess of our climate. And then I was going to reflect on the challenge that posed to discipleship. As it happened, I chickened out for the second part of that, the link to the climate. And it was partly because I didn't know the congregation, and so I wasn't sure how it would land with them, and partly because it felt like a bit of a disjunction in terms of the way that I'd prepared the first part of what I was going to preach about. And so in the moment, I decided I would drop it and leave it be, and just finish there. Just kind of land at that point. And I'm still not sure whether I was right to drop it on the fly. I'm leaning more towards thinking that I perhaps should have mentioned it after all. But it's what made me think when I came across the article that you've been invited to have a look at before coming here tonight. Having that experience in my head as I came across this article made me think, actually, I might not be the only one who has these moments of chickening out when it comes to such things. And so that I propose that maybe we could make a space within these evenings for people to be able to think about that together, discuss that together, share our shame stories. I'll also share a bit of encouragement though, because last Sunday I was back in that self-same church, and it was a harvest festival, and actually the whole of the sermon pretty much was about the way that harvests are threatened by what's going on with the climate. and it landed really well. So that was an encouraging thing, and helps me to think I was perhaps a little bit too hasty in chickening out previously. So that's the mise en scène, and opening up a bit about my own journey with this. Hopefully that will encourage you to be able to talk to one another, and also with me and Barbara and Stefan in due course. In a little while, we will go into smaller groups to discuss a couple of questions, and I'll put those into the chat in a moment. But just as we get ready to do that, just a reminder about, if you like, the implied group covenant, so to speak, that we have when we do something like this, which is, as I understand it, we're inviting you to hear other people respectfully, if you like, to hear as you would be listened to, and speak as you would be spoken with. So that's one dimension of it. And the other one is about confidentiality. When in the smaller groups, that's not going to be recorded. And so we invite you to keep confidences of things that are shared within the group, unless someone explicitly says it's okay to share that with other people. I hope that that's okay. If it's not, leave now. Not literally, well, maybe. But that's what we're operating with. So I hope that's okay. And in a moment, I'm going to invite Stefan to throw us into, or Barbara to throw us into smaller groups. But into the chat, I've put a couple of questions or so, just in case any of you, for some reason, finding it difficult to read that. I'm asking us to have a chat about whether any of us have got times when we've bottled out of preaching about climate-related concerns, and if we have, what lay behind that bottling out, and are we able to identify what contexts we are most likely to bottle it? So just for a few minutes, those are the kind of concerns to chat over with one another. I hope you'll have a good time with those questions, or a helpful time anyway.
So I think it would be really good to understand. You're going to give us just your views on the Margaret Bullitt Jonas article. So what struck you, Andii? Tell us about it.
I'm actually thinking what I was most challenged by with that article. I think what's, because it's the live thing for me at the moment, is remembering to preach the love of God. And actually, in a sense, she didn't say, I don't think she says this explicitly, but the sense of preaching the love of God and God's commitment to us and God's faithfulness to us, without necessarily thinking that that's going to be shown in a particular way that things will pan out. We're just going to have to kind of learn to live with the love of God and the faithfulness of God, but in a radically uncertain future. But it's that holding on to the love of God kind of thing that really has landed well with me. That's what I'm taking away from it at the moment. But I've also put into the chat now, if you hadn't already spotted it, folks, that a couple of questions to take into the groups. So just inviting you to share with your other group members what you may have found helpful with the article, and we may share some of those at the other end of the group, the little groups, and also maybe think about what kind of responses do we and should we be preaching for. Val and Peter, I think, have kind of pointed us a little bit in that direction already, so let's see if we can develop that a wee bit.
Yeah, so it'd be really good to, again, to hear some feedback on those questions. You know, what kind of responses should we be seeking? Why are we preaching? So how did your discussion go? What have you got to tell us?
report that none of us have read the article.
Ah, okay, that's an issue. Yeah, okay. Well, very honest of you, Jim. So thank you for that. Did you make any progress, Jim, on the question?
Well, the question, it seems to me, from what I picked up on what Andy was saying, is how you approach the truth of climate and keep hold of the love of God. Seems to me the conundrum that we're all facing. I was just ending up on a bit of a roll talking about the way to get to joy is to face up to the grief, and you have to go through that. You have to face it, and a lot of us, including me, deny things, and some things are too painful, especially if they're close to home. And we have to look at it, and often the way that you get, particularly if you do things together to address it, even if it doesn't work or it's a bit naff, it's actually trying to do something, and you go through that facing up to it, to the certain joy of saying, just brings you to the hope through action.
That's a very good point, Jim. And one of the key issues is that in our society today, we're not used to grappling with the pain and the uncomfortable issues. So all over the place, people that just want the la 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 la, all the nice stuff, and so they end up empty. And we have to help guide through and deal with those issues, because a lot of people on the climate stuff, they just don't know what to do. And so it's better just to put your fingers in your ears and hope it goes away.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful to talk about acknowledging the grief and coming through that to a different place. I just think that is such a long process, actually, when people are not used to that kind of a process. And it's, I mean, if I don't.
Lost you. Is frozen, hasn't she?
Yes, shame, isn't it? Such a good one. Holding our breath to try and
how much can you do, really?
So what you're saying is it's difficult
in
to help
that rather artificial 10 minutes.
It sounded really great, Sally, what you're sharing with us, but I'm afraid we didn't really get it. Oh, do you want to try again?
Do you want me to try again?
Yes, you broke up. It sounded great stuff, but we didn't really get it.
We only got it in snatches.
Okay, I don't know where it broke off really. I was just trying to talk about the difficulty of getting people to engage with that sort of process, which seems to me to be quite a long drawn out process. And in the 10 minutes or so that you've got for a sermon, and in that very sort of artificial situation, I think it's quite difficult to help people with that, really. It would be much easier on a one-to-one, perhaps. But I mean, I agree with the basic principle. I also, this will sound to you all like heresy, actually, but I mean, I'm relatively new to this, and I think grief was a major factor in my awakening, if you like. And yet recently on retreat, I reached a different point where I thought, actually, I can't deal with this. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to do anything, but I kind of reached that next point of no, actually, I've had enough. I don't want to deal with it. I just don't want to. No.
Sally, that's such deep stuff there. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think one of the key issues is it is really painful and difficult, and Christians deal with this in a couple of different ways. A whole bunch of Christians go, well, this is so hard, I'm just going to trust God. which sounds great, and it is great, because we do have to trust God. And then there's a bunch of people who don't trust God and panic, and that's not a good thing. But fundamentally, we have to, as Christians, abandon ourselves into the faith that we have, but we have to act in love. So it's not a complacent do nothing. We have to live this gospel, which means people are dying and will die and will be hurt and damaged, and we just have to trust and we have to work at the same time.
And that's why we need to take this God-given opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been beavering away at this for, 20 years, 30 years, and sort of, if you were different, you were a different person. If you, oh yes, you're into that climate stuff, most people weren't. Now it has come at least something that's talked about a bit, still not enough, but a bit. And this is the opportunity to meet people where they are. I mean, I do wonder, people say, oh, we must pray about it. And I kind of think, for goodness sake, I thought we'd all been praying for ages.
Yeah.
People a lot of time don't seem to know what is going on. And then you're talking about the, too much hype perhaps about Glasgow, but this is our opportunity to, know that there are people marching across the country and there are young people getting involved, and, being Christian itself is much more alive than it was when I first met it, certainly. And so we've got a huge responsibility. And now we're talking about, not expecting too much from Glasgow, but what worries me is what's going to come out of it. And if it's only going to be sound bites, and if we don't get proper distribution, proper reports of what really does go on, because I'm not going to be a complete pessimist. There'll be a lot going on. There'll be a lot of meeting of minds. There'll be a lot of sharing. It's a terrific opportunity. But what everybody's going to turn around and say, oh, that was a waste of time. Oh, they didn't do anything, did they? Do you know?
I don't believe that, but I would like to hear Val's point as well.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, one of the things I was going to say was we mustn't forget, we keep talking about climate, and I'm sure we're only doing it because it's shorthand, but we need to remember that the earth is a whole integrated creation, and that when we talk about climate justice, we're talking about justice for everything that lives on this earth. And that, in a way, I think is a way in, because we would never think, would we, of having a service in which we hadn't got intercessions for people. And I think the idea of broadening out the intercessions so they always have a climate dimension is one of the ways in which we can gently introduce this into services. But also, one of the things we've done in our circuit, a little group of 3 of us have done a list of resources, and one of the things we did as part of that was to point out all the different parts of the service in which you can have some sort of earth creation justice dimension. Right from the beginning, when you have the call to worship, what do you choose? Choose something out of the Psalms, right through the prayers of praise, the prayers of confession. Well, that's a great one. We've got plenty to confess. If you don't use the lectionary readings, what readings do you choose? So if you're a preacher, in particular if you're a preacher in something like the Methodist Church, well, we've got the huge luxury, really, of leading the service and sort of curating the whole thing. There are so many different areas that we can find, and you don't have to do it right through the service every time, but I think a lot of it is drip.
Yeah,
I agree about and one of the most moving, I mean, I was in tears after it, and I led it, and I'd chosen it. We did quite a long prayer of lament, and at the end of each section we sang senzenina, but what have we done? What have we done? And the number of people afterwards who came up and said, can I have the words to that? That was so moving. It really made me think so much. And just the idea of providing a space in the service for people to mourn the loss of what Andy Lester was talking about on Sunday at Southall, about the 10 to 20 species of animals and birds and things who have gone extinct during the period of that service of an hour and a half. 20 species gone, maybe, that we've never had a chance to get to know, that we've never, I don't know. I mean, that just makes me want to cry just saying it, let alone thinking about it.
Thank you, Val. Any more thoughts? Susan, let's take the last one there.
Yes, just made me realise how different it was when it was Make Poverty History. My church sent 6 coaches up to wherever it was in Scotland. I've heard nothing referred to at all about the climate emergency. Yes, in the prayers sometimes, but nothing actually from the pulpit, and certainly no thoughts about a study group or what can we do or local action. And yet a church down the road has produced a little leaflet, a bit like Val mentioned, but also pointing them to different things that people can do, and also linking onwards to a wider view beyond sort of just recycling your plastic sort of thing, but looking at much bigger things. So it just seems that some churches don't want to know about these issues. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Well, yes.
Sorry. I was just going to say in response to Susan, it makes me wonder whether part of our task then as preachers is to help give some churches the vocabulary and the imagination to handle this liturgically, and in conversations over coffee and and all of that kind of thing. That's just my kind of immediate response and thinking. Yeah, maybe that's the task in some cases.
And that is why I joined this, because I, thinking it's important. Thank you.
Ros, you're on mute. You're on mute, Ros. Thank you.
Can I commend to you a modern Jewish prayer? You'll need to look it up on the web to get the details. It's called Likrat Shabbat, Likrat, and then Shabbat. And it isn't actually about climate change, but there are several verses, and each one begins, "We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to answer our prayers and do this, that, and the other." And then the final verse talks about, because you have already given us, the knowledge and the skills. And it seems to me that this prayer sums up beautifully. It doesn't mention, it needs somebody to write a climate verse, because it mentions all sorts of other things. But it's the fundamental principle that we don't just sit back and say, well, we've prayed about it, now we leave it to God to sort it out. God has given us, as it says in Genesis, dominion. That's not domination, it's actually stewardship, and we ought to be getting on with it.
Golly, thank you very much.
Can I just make sure I've got the word right? Likrat Shabbat.
Yes, it's L-I-K.
Yeah.
R-A-T.
Okay, right.
And then Shabbat is 2 B's in it, I think.
Okay.
Well, we are out of time in terms of our promise to do this in an hour. We wanted to share with you some climate outreach slides in terms of different segments, and I think we'll let people go, and anyone who's interested to stay for a moment, we'll just share them after that. But can I just pass over to Andy to close us in prayer with a closing blessing?
Yeah, sure. Well, hang on a minute, I've just lost it.
Google Likrat Shabbat quickly.
Yeah, I have been doing that, but there's so many things, I don't know what to choose. So, yeah, difficult one, that. But, yeah, I'm going to finish with the end of that liturgy that I shared right at the beginning. But I'll just say it. rework our anger as energy for repair of the world, refashion our guilt as active love. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Wherever we will tread is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. Of course, there are acknowledgements there to General Gerard Manley Hopkins and to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Just in case some of those words sounded familiar, they will be.
Well, Andy, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that today. We really do appreciate it. The next session in 2 weeks' time is exploring the way of life, encouraging one another. So that's quite appropriate to our discussion today. George Dow. I'll ask a bit of the follow-up information in email. Feel free to go now. The session's ended. I'm just going to put a couple of slides up on how to talk to different types of groups, and that'll be a resource that I can link into the email that you get as well. So those of you who want to go, feel free to go, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.